He paid for first class, wore the same suit as every other executive, and boarded the plane with nothing more than a laptop and quiet focus. But from the moment he sat down, something was off. Greetings skipped, menus withheld, and when breakfast arrived, he was told there was nothing left, while the man inches away unwrapped his fresh meal. This wasn't an accident. It was a message, and what unfolded in the hours that followed would cost an entire crew their jobs. But before that moment of reckoning, the silence inside that cabin carried a weight no one could ignore. Morris Lattimore was no stranger to early mornings. Long before most of the city stirred, he was already awake, scanning reports, planning strategy, and preparing for meetings that could decide the future of his company. At 48, he had built himself into one of the most respected black CEOs in the logistics world, a man known for calm precision under pressure. Travel was part of the rhythm. Airports, boardrooms, hotel lobbies, spaces where he had learned to blend focus with resilience. On this particular morning, his flight felt like just another step in a busy schedule. A first-class ticket, a window seat, and hours to refine notes before addressing a board of investors in Boston. Nothing about it suggested trouble. Yet beneath the hum of the cabin, quiet currents of tension were already forming. What seemed like a routine journey would soon reveal how fragile dignity becomes when bias takes its seat beside you. But Morris had no idea that the smallest details of this flight, the greetings, the glances, the trays, would be dissected by millions before the day was over. The cabin doors sealed, engines roared, and the plane began its climb into the pale morning sky. Morris leaned back, tablet in hand, eyes scanning numbers and forecasts. He was focused, but alert. Travel had taught him to read rooms quickly, to notice subtle things most ignored. And even in the quiet hum of first class, something didn't sit right. The first attendant had brushed by him without a word. No greeting, no offer of water, just a fleeting glance before moving on. At first, Morris let it slide. A long shift, a tired crew, plausible excuses. But then came the menus. Handed to passengers in rows 1 through 3, each tray table receiving a small sign of care. Each one, except his. He waited, silent, giving the benefit of the doubt. But when the attendant stopped at the row in front of him, cheerfully offering omelets and salmon croissants, the pattern began to sharpen. Across the aisle, a woman in her 70s lowered her crossword. Helen McKinley, retired judge, carried decades of experience in recognizing what others ignored. Her eyes narrowed as she watched Morris passed over again and again. She'd seen bias dressed as oversight before, and she knew this wasn't random. She quietly shifted her phone into her lap, camera angled low, her face calm but focused. The meal cart rattled closer, its metallic clinks cutting through the quiet. Passengers perked up at the smell of butter and coffee. Morris straightened in his seat, waiting. The attendant smiled at the man in 3C, setting a tray down with practiced warmth. Then, without pause, she skipped him. Not a glance, not an apology. Just an empty space where his service should have been. "I didn't get a menu," Morris said evenly, his voice calm but firm. The attendant flicked her eyes toward him for a moment. "We're out of meals," she replied, tone flat, before turning back to the man beside him. 2 feet away, a tray brimmed with food. 2 feet away, his reality was denied. Inside, Morris felt no surprise. This wasn't the first time silence had been louder than words. He looked out the window, jaw steady, while the tension in the cabin thickened. Helen pressed record. If not for her, the moment would vanish like so many others. Minutes passed before a second attendant, younger and seemingly unaware, noticed the empty tray table. "Did you not get a meal, sir?" he asked, startled. Morris lifted his eyes. "I was told you were out." The attendant froze, then rushed to the galley, returning moments later with a tray. "We had extras," he said softly, placing it down like an apology. But by then, the harm was done. Morris didn't touch the food. He wasn't hungry for it anymore. What struck Helen wasn't just the denial. It was the ease with which it was done. The casual tone, the unblinking face, the certainty that no one would notice or care. And yet, here it was, recorded in 3 minutes of damning silence. As the flight continued, whispers of discomfort rippled through the rows. A man with headphones offered his meal. A woman glanced uneasily between her coffee and Morris's untouched tray. Most said nothing. That silence, Helen knew, was familiar too. Morris leaned back, composed as ever, but inside he carried the weight of every time dignity was treated like an optional service. He didn't need to raise his voice for the injustice to be clear. The truth was already there, settling over the cabin like a storm cloud no one could avoid. And what Helen had caught on her phone would not stay quiet. Because once the doors opened in Boston, this flight would no longer belong to the airline. It would belong to the world. But before that reckoning, the moment of truth was still to come. And when it did, the fallout would be impossible to ignore. The descent into Boston should have been routine. Seatbelts clicked, trays cleared, attendants smiling like nothing had happened. But for Morris, the silence of the last 2 hours carried a different weight. He sat motionless, hands folded, eyes forward. He hadn't touched the meal that arrived late. He didn't need to. The truth of what had happened in that cabin lingered louder than any breakfast could cover. When the plane touched down, phones buzzed awake. Notifications lit up screens, passengers scrolled casually. But one phone held something different. Helen's. In her lap rested a 3-minute recording, quiet, unshakable evidence of the moments the crew thought no one would notice. Her finger hovered, debating. Post it, and the world would see. Leave it, and the moment would disappear into the fog of denial. She hit upload. By the time the plane rolled to the gate, the video had already begun to spread. The comments came fast. Disgusting. Unbelievable in 2025. Proof you can buy the seat, but not the respect. Strangers online were already watching what Morris had lived. And the crew? Still smiling, still collecting cups, oblivious that their every move was being dissected beyond the walls of that aircraft. As passengers stood and gathered their bags, Morris remained seated, waiting. He wasn't angry. He wasn't broken. But he was resolute. He knew the pattern too well. This was never about the food. It was about the message behind being denied it. A reminder that no matter how high you climb, someone will still try to clip your wings. And then it came. An announcement rippled through the intercom just as the door cracked open. All first-class passengers were asked to remain seated momentarily. Confusion buzzed. Eyes darted. Whispers spread. Then uniformed airline supervisors boarded quickly, faces sharp, voices clipped. The crew was asked to step aside. One by one, attendants were pulled to the galley, whispers cut short by the unmistakable weight of consequence. Helen's phone vibrated again. Her video was now everywhere. Reporters, news outlets, hashtags. It was no longer just a flight. It was a spotlight. And in that spotlight there was no hiding. The crew's practiced smiles had vanished, replaced by pale disbelief as they were escorted off the aircraft under watchful stares. Passengers murmured, some wide-eyed, some quietly satisfied. For Morris, it was confirmation of something he had always known. Silence can last for years, but the truth can spread in seconds. And as he finally rose from his seat, briefcase in hand, one thought cut through the noise. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Because once the world had seen the truth, the question wasn't whether the airline would respond, but how far the fallout would reach. The crew never returned to their posts. By the time the passengers disembarked, the airline had already begun drafting statements, scrambling to contain the firestorm spreading across every screen. For Morris, the morning that began as routine now ended in headlines. He didn't ask for it, didn't seek the spotlight, but suddenly his quiet act of endurance was no longer private. In the hours that followed, the story grew beyond him. News anchors debated intent. Commentators questioned whether it was racism or oversight. Former employees came forward, confirming patterns of behavior. Each new voice added weight to what Helen's camera had already shown. Discrimination isn't always shouted. It's often whispered, hidden in the spaces where people assume no one is watching. By nightfall, the airline announced that the crew involved had been terminated pending further review. A corporate decision wrapped in polished language, but everyone understood what it meant. The evidence was undeniable. Yet even with accountability, the damage was done. Because for Morris and for millions who recognized themselves in his silence, the incident was more than a firing. It was a mirror reflecting how even success, wealth, and status don't erase the weight of prejudice. How a man in a tailored suit, sitting in the front of the plane, could still be treated as if he didn't belong. And how many others, without witnesses, without cameras, had endured the same erasure unnoticed. Morris continued with his day, his meeting, his slides, his composed presence. But something lingered, heavy and unshakable. He knew the story was bigger than him now. Bigger than one flight or one crew. It was about every silent moment of exclusion that had been dismissed as a mistake. About how often black dignity is placed on trial, while those who diminish it walk away unseen. Helen, too, sat with her decision. She hadn't posted the video for fame, but for truth. She knew the backlash would come, the questions, the attacks. Still, she chose to shine a light because silence, left unchecked, becomes complicity. And for those watching online, the story became a lesson. Injustice doesn't always come with sirens or threats. Sometimes it arrives on a tray or in the absence of one. It wears a polite smile, carries a professional badge, and slips by unless someone dares to notice. So the question remains, how many more flights, more offices, more classrooms, more boardrooms will replay the same quiet erasures before change stops being reactive and starts being real? How many more times must dignity be denied before society admits that the seat was never the issue? It was who was sitting in it. The truth is simple. Racism doesn't need to be loud to be devastating. It doesn't need to be violent to leave scars. And until silence no longer protects the comfortable, it will continue to cost lives, careers, and humanity itself. Morris walked off that plane the same man who had boarded, calm, accomplished, dignified. But the world now saw what he carried. The question is, now that you've seen it too, what will you do with it?